I'm fresh out the gym, so I got a little bit of
Got that
little
energy.
to me. Yeah, cool. So thanks everybody for joining us. We'll get this started in about 2 minutes. Let people join the festivities. Um, you know, Super excited to talk about the entity stuff today. But in the meantime, if you're here, you're watching on YouTube, watching on wherever you're watching, let us know where you're chiming in from. Hit us in the comments. Am I supposed to be like, yo, hit the bell, subscribe, smash the button, like people say and all that? But nevertheless, super excited for everyone to be here. And we'll get started in a couple minutes. Any words of wisdom y'all want to share with us before we get started, Cindy and Ruth?
This has nothing to do with entities, but if you haven't figured out what you're going to do when Universal Analytics goes away, you should hit pause on this and go do that. If you want to implement Google Analytics 4, it takes a hot second to just get the code on your site, get it collecting data. Just like I'm literally having conversations with the parents at like birthday parties that my kid goes to about analytics data right now. Like, have a plan. If you don't have a plan, go make a plan.
Word. How about you, Cindy?
Oh my gosh, I have nothing to add. That sounds like really sage advice.
I wish GA4 wasn't terrible.
Maybe
Yeah, it would be nice if
better.
it wasn't broken.
Yeah, it'd be cool if they could just like not launch a alpha product and tell us all to use it.
That would be cool. It would also be useful if they wouldn't give things that are different the same names as things that were in the previous version, which they could have very easily not done.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is all why we keep jobs. So
Keeps us busy.
Cool. All right, well, let's jump into this. So, like I said, we've got a lot to cover today, and I'm super excited to have the SEO Avengers with me, Cindy and Ruth. So let's make this happen. So I'm Mike King. Greetings and salutations for anyone that's watching. I'm the founder and CEO over at iPullRank. You're on our webinar, so you probably already know that. But, I also want to introduce my fantastic co-hosts, Ruth, Burr, Reedy. You want to tell us about yourself, Ruth?
Hi, I'm Ruth Reedy. I'm the CEO at UpBuild. We are a digital marketing agency specializing in technical SEO, advanced web analytics, and whole funnel digital marketing strategy. I've been in the industry since 2006 doing various things and stepped in as the CEO at UpBuild earlier this year. And I'm super happy to be here.
Super happy to have you. And Cindy, tell us everything we need to know about you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cindy Krum, and I'm the CEO of MobileMoxie. We specialize in mobile and technical SEO, as well as app SEO. And we have, for a really long time, company started in 2008. I started doing SEO in 2003-ish when I was building sites. And really doing it more in 2005. And we have the first mobile-focused SEO toolset and plugins for Chrome and WordPress. And I'm excited about those, and I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Thanks for being here. So lots to talk about today. We're going to cover how you should think about designing an entity SEO strategy. How do we identify, build, and strengthen our entities? And then what are the best ways and best tools to be using to make all this work and also measure your performance? So then we'll give you some parting thoughts, because why not? And, then we'll close with a commercial, of course. So, first thing I want to say here is that in our space, we've talked about entity SEO in this like high-minded way for a very long time, but I don't know that a lot of people actually do it. And I think it's a function of, there be very few tools out there that really support it, and also just people not really knowing what they should be doing. And so I just want to kind of take a step back and give the history of this a bit before we get into like, okay, what is it that you actually do? And then what can you use to make it happen? So if you remember back in 2011, Google made this blog post specifically rather, Amit Singhal, the gentleman that used to run search over there. And he talked about going from things rather than strings. And just for clarity on what that means, it's like, they went from just measuring and understanding words on the page to understanding the people, places, and things that are represented on that page. And then ultimately they use that information to build the knowledge graph. And so the knowledge graph, we all know what that is to some degree. You see the knowledge panels where it really shows information about those entities, but it also is used to inform the direct answering of questions as it relates to those entities. But, entities are used in a variety of ways across search. And, a lot of what we want to talk about today is how they're used, how Google understands them, and then how you can actually leverage that in your strategy. So one of the things that Google did to inform all of this, they bought a company called MetaWeb. MetaWeb had a product called Freebase, which was basically a large data set of entities that Google then pulled in to build what they call their knowledge vault. And then they shut down the company, and you can still get access to Freebase, like what it was at the point where they shut it down. You can download it now and do whatever you want with it. And so ultimately, the data from Freebase would inform something called Google's Knowledge Vault, which is used to build the knowledge graph and all these other things that are leveraging entities. And so ultimately, when Google shut that down, they did it largely because they realized Wikidata was better. And so what they did is they took their data set and they said, like, hey, Wikidata community, do you want to use this? And then the Wikidata community was like, nah, yo, this is trash. Your data quality is not very good here. And so what the compromise was is that Google built this tool where the Wikidata community could have access to the data. And as they were editing entries, they could determine whether or not they wanted to bring in the data from Freebase. So it was something that took a very long time. And I don't know if that it ever was actually completed, but nevertheless, Google started to shift their focus more towards leveraging what comes out of Wikidata because of the fact that it's a much stronger community that's actively working on this data set. So schema.org, that also rolled out around that same time, in 2011, where the search engines all got together and they said, like, hey, let's come up with a vocabulary to support, what is called the semantic web. So effectively, how can we, in your content, how can we indicate that we're talking about these pieces, these people, places, and things, or nouns, or however you want to call entities, so it can be extracted and then used in a variety of ways, across different search engines. And so before all of that happened, before Google built this knowledge graph, before, entities became a thing that they actually cared about, and also before people that got into blockchain stuff were calling that Web3, there was something called the semantic web, which was known as Web3. And so what that was is basically the web as we know it, but underpinned by linked data so that you can understand, again, the people, places, and things that are being talked about on the web. And what is that? Well, basically, it is the web we know, like I said, but with a bunch of layers to tie it to that understanding. So effectively, you've got like the semantic data, which was largely done with RDF rather than with schema.org, because that didn't exist at that point. And then all the different entities had basically they were all like identified by an ID, and then there was just like this data set where you could find out more information about these entities, right? And so this was underpinned again by the data that we talked about. So Wikidata, also DBpedia, which is just another representation of what Wikipedia is. And so these were big data stores. And there's other ones. There's ones like Yago. There's something that Microsoft has called Satori and so on. But for the public web, it's largely Wikipedia in a variety of different formats. And so before we got to schema, there was something called RDF, which was just another way of having a bunch of microdata about, different things. And then there's also Sparkle, which is a database querying language where you could get access to all of that data in a queryable way, in the same way that you get data out of like your standard databases. So all of this was from the mind of the gentleman that invented the web as we know it, Tim Berners-Lee. And the quote from him about this was that the semantic web is not a separate web, but an extension of the current one, in which information is given well-defined meaning by better enabling computers and people to work in cooperation. So basically, how do we take all this content that makes up the web and then make it better understandable by a computer so that we can do all sorts of different computations and then surface that information in better ways? So when we talk about schema, a lot of that was a mechanism for search engines to just better understand what's on the web and then extract those entities. There's a variety of ways that this can be done, but that can be miscalculated for any number of reasons. And so this was just a way to definitively say like, hey, this is what this page is about, and a very easy way for, search engines to extract that. So, Cindy, what is an entity?
So thank you for that deep history. So I'll jump in and kind of explain where that gets us right now. So all of that history and all of those different technologies come together now into something that Google calls the topic layer. And the topic layer is this kind of external understanding of the world that takes on the various ontologies that came out of that process, and the semantic understanding where things build on each other based on different linkages and relationships. And they put it in this thing called topic layer, and the topic layer is based on entities. And a lot of SEOs struggle to understand entities because we've focused for so many years on keywords. And so SEOs will think that an entity is basically like a keyword and all of its synonyms or something like that. But it's not, it's that plus way more. So an entity is the conceptual understanding of a thing and its relationship to other things. And so we've got this image of all of these kind of icons and lines drawn to other icons. And that's a very simplified kind of understanding or visualization of what the topic layer might look like. But when we think about entities, what defines them is not necessarily just a verbal definition. It's also the relationships they have to other things. And the reason this is powerful for Google is it gets them where they want to be in a very computational and technical way. If we understand that mother is related to daughter is related to grandfather in the same ways in English as it is in every other language, or we make that assumption, then we can use what we know in one language and apply it to all the other languages and then just crawl and validate it. So we can make really educated guesses without having to have as much data and learning in each individual language. And we can learn about the world around us computationally in a machine learning kind of way with all the languages at once based on entities separate from the actual language. So the keyword itself could be interchangeable with all of its translations, or theoretically, you could drop the keywords out and write an entirely different language that would map in this same way. And with the entity understanding, there are kind of solid linkages, and they have kind of different scores between them. So you have a confidence score or a probabilistic score of how related these things are. And sometimes that changes a little bit from one culture to another, one language to another, but not a whole lot. And so what Google does is they take this entity understanding and they add the semantic nuance of language understanding, and they can understand the difference between a query for something like red stoplight, which we would all imagine as something you see when you're driving, versus stoplight red, which you might imagine as a nail polish color or a lipstick color. And so Google's gotten much smarter than a lot of SEOs realize, where it's not just about one keyword and the amount of links and keyword density and whatever on the page. It's really much more about linguistic understanding, semantic understanding, ontology, and how it fits into a larger picture, but then also using this tech to make Google smarter in a lot of places where they were weak, to speed up the learning curve.
I was just listening. I was like, that sounds awesome. So, just an example of this tech at work. When you query Google, one of the first things that they do is look to understand which entities are represented in that query. And so this image comes from one of their blog posts where they're explaining it. And so when you look at a query like who was the US president when the Angels won the World Series, you got to break that down into a list of presidents, understanding which company or country it is, and then figuring out, okay, the Angels are a baseball team. We're not talking about something from a mythology or anything like that. And then you also understand that the World Series is a thing, and so there's a series of winners that are associated with that. So if you know anything about object-oriented programming, there's this concept of there being what is called a class, and then a class has a series of attributes that go with that. So think of an entity as a class, and then you've got a series of things that represent that entity, which allow you to make connections based on understanding that this entity is what's being talked about here. And so that also kind of brings up this idea that not only are they looking to understand your query by leveraging entities, but they're also in the background expanding your query. So what we think of is like, okay, they're just using a bunch of synonyms, or they may not even be doing that. Like you may just be thinking, I put these words in here, Google does something with those words, and then that's that. But really what's happening is they're matching those keywords in your, or the components of your query that are those entities, and then looking at all the other information that they understand about that, and then bringing that all into play to figure out what to show you in those results. And so Paul Hard talked about this largely from the synonym perspective at one of the different, what do you call it? The Webmaster Central conferences or whatever. And he talked about how there's a bunch of ors that are added to your query in the background. So the example he gave here is cycling tours in Italy, which then they do cycling or cycle or bicycle or in a whole bunch of other words that are added in the background so that they can pull the right document set related to your query. But that's not just the synonyms themselves. It is the entities that are related to Italy, to cycling tours, and so on. And so there's a series of patents that really explain this idea in great depth, where it's like you put the query in, cool, let's figure out what the variants are, let's pull all that together, and then try different combinations of these queries to get to a point where we really feel like we're answering the question. So one of the things that people may or may not know is that the algorithm isn't just one thing. It's a series of what are called scoring functions. And so they'll say, all right, well, let's try this version of the query. Let's spin up a bunch of a list of documents, and then we can check the confidence of those results versus another scoring function. And then the ultimate output is the series of pages that they feel win based on whichever subset of those entities in your query that they actually use. So, Cindy, you want to talk about entity maps?
Yeah. So when we think about the entity relationships and building them out strategically for SEO, what you have to start with is understanding kind of the concept of an entity map. So how the entities that exist in the world map to each other. And then when you do a query, looking to find with the top ranking sites for that query, if it's not you, how are the entities on that site mapped to other entities, or how is that website related to other websites, concepts, topics, and how is Google seeing that when they crawl and index the web? And once you understand that, your job, if it's the right fit, is that you should be able to mimic that kind of entity map and look at what you've got talked about in your on your website, linked in the different architecture and linking structure of your site and the relationships of your site to other sites, and see that your map looks a whole lot like the map of the sites that are ranking in the top positions. And if it's not, you need to find the nodes and the pieces that are missing and get them in there. Or if you can't do that, or if they're all there, then you might need to strengthen some of the relationships or the understanding between one node and another. And so that's when you're thinking about entities from a very tactical SEO perspective, what you're looking for is the hole in your entity map that's keeping you from being in the top position that you want to be. So drawing things out, even in a very rudimentary way, like this, and then doing it for the top 3 sites and then your site, and using some of the tools you're going to see later is going to help you know how the entities are mapped on your site versus your competitors, and what's missing and where you need to focus your time. Oh, and then one more thing, actually, Mike, sorry. Sure. One of the things, if you're not clear, or if you're just lost for understanding the entities that you see in a search result, you can get clues from things like Knowledge Graph, where it has related companies, related people, or related whatever. Anything that Google says is related in the Knowledge Graph, that's an entity relationship where you're similar but different, but you want Google to see that you're also in that set of companies or things. And then also things like related queries, people also search for, people also ask, and any kind of disambiguation. Those are going to give you clues about what Google understands as related to the query, or what Google isn't sure if it's related to the query. And these things evolve over time, so it's not just something you can check and then take for granted. Disambiguation kind of comes and goes away. I remember in the early days of disambiguation, you could search Google for the keyword bread, and it would disambiguate it and say, did you mean bread the food or bread the band? And when they got enough clicks on bread the food, they were like, yeah, no one means bread the band. And so they learned that they don't need to disambiguate that, but changes in the way people talk about things, changes in the words people use to describe things, can add those questions into Google's kind of algorithmic brain. So it's good to watch for those things over time. Okay, now I'm done. Sorry, Mike.
No problem. It's all great information. And so just to, kind of explain further, when they are looking at the entities in your queries and also looking at the entities in your content, they're able to look at the catalog of information associated with those folks. So as an example here, you've got the query, which is, Barack Obama's parents. They can then look in the data set related to that query and see the connection between Barack Obama and Ann Dunham as his mother, and then be able to, better discern what they should be showing in relationship to that. And so what that allows them to build isn't just the knowledge graph. They're also able to leverage graph theory pretty heavily to build a layer of inference on top of that. So, they have the direct relationships, but they can also tell that because there's a direct relationship between a shoe and a sports shoe, that there may also be a relationship between, a sneaker and a running shoe. So it allows them to basically make connections that are not inherently explicit, both in your content and then across the web as well.
That was such an extremely Mike King example to use.
Hey, I can't be anybody but me.
You gotta think about it all day, every day.
So one thing I want to highlight is that it's not just about the markup. Of course, it is about the markup, but it's also able to be extracted based on natural language. And so what you have is a subject predicate object relationship, and it can be extracted from your sentences based on how you lay them out. So if you say, Paris is located in France, then a search engine is able to extract that and understand that as a piece of information that could potentially be added to its knowledge graph. Ultimately, what they want to see is that there's consistency about that information across the web, because they can't just be like, Oh yeah, Paris is in New York. I mean, there might be a Paris, New York, but whatever. Whole point here is that they want to make sure that they have consistency in that information so they can leverage it effectively. And so you also want to do that in your copy. It's again not just about schema markup, not just about like, okay, am I using these entities in my H1 tags and so on. Again, it can be within your sentences, because what you're seeing here is an example of a sentence that might just be naturally written, where it's like, Ava worked in the excuse me, insurance industry as an agent for 4+ years. Potentially, a search engine could break that down and figure out what the relationship is, but it's better to be more explicit here, where it's like Ava Lynch, just as if that's like an actual person, is an insurance agent. So that's 2 entities with 5 years of experience. So it's easier for them to extract that, and that's the equivalent of the schema markup that you're seeing right here. So, Cindy, you want to tell us how SEOs know if Google understands an entity?
Yep, absolutely. So when you're doing all this work and you're updating your page, let's say you write some new copy. You're like, okay, I get it. I understand entities now. I need to put my entities in the copy, and you do it. How do you validate that you've done a good job? Well, you can go straight to Google's natural language API tool. It's free. There are bigger versions, but there's a free version that they have available where you can just copy and paste and plop some text in, and it'll give you scores and highlight the different entities that it finds on the page. And so when it gives you you can put long text in, you can put short text in, but you can see what entities is Google pulling out of this paragraph or this page. And it'll highlight and it'll say, this is a person. And it might not be a name. It might be a referee. If you write blah, 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 sports and referee, it'll be like a referee is a kind of person. So it understands the difference between us using the word referee when we're talking about a person, or us using the word referee when we're talking about a verb, right? The person is a referee for the game, or they're refereeing a game, or they're going to referee this decision. You can use the words in, there are lots of words that have multiple ways to use them in a language, but Google parses that all down to the language. They break down every single language like they're in 5th grade diagramming a sentence and say, this is the noun, this is the verb, this is the actor, and this describes this. They break it all down, and then they find the entities, and they take a guess, and they give you a salience score, and they say, we think this is a person, and this is super salient to the rest of the conversation, super relevant. Or we say, this is a person, or this is a thing, or this is an event, or this is a work of art. All these different categorizations that they have, and they'll tell you how strongly they think it's relevant or not. And then you can click through and you can see the sentiment. Is it good or bad? Does it think that you're writing good things and positive commentary, or negative? And then categories. How would Google categorize and lump all of this thing? Would they say that it's part of a sport, or part of entertainment, or maybe a little bit of both, and you get those both there with different scores? And so it takes a guess. So that's something you want to look at things. And same thing again, you look at what the top ranking sites are doing, and then you want to make sure your entity, the same kinds of entities, are popping up with the same frequency and similar scores, and that's going to help you rank. And I can tell you that this works not just in Google's main search algorithm, but we work with other search algorithms too, having to do with apps and other kinds of things. And we've seen things by changing the description of something, where it understood a title of something as a work of art instead of maybe something else like a podcast, or media, or entertainment. It was miscategorizing the thing for us, but for everyone ranking, it understood it correctly. And so all we had to do was literally rewrite one sentence, and we went from not being, in the first 100 positions to being in 17, and then continuing to climb up. So it in some cases, it can be make or break. So you want to double check that not only are the keywords highlighted, because I tell people you want that tool to light up like a Christmas tree with all the different colors and all the different entities, but you want the right entities there, and you want things identified as the correct type of entity, not just that it understands it's a thing, but it understands it's the right kind of thing.
Just to jump in really quickly, just one common misconception that I'm seeing some people discussing when talking about Google's NLP API is that unless you've got that link that says Wikipedia article, which you can see here under M&M, that it is then not an actual recognized entity, and that Google is only deriving that categorization from context. That's not true. Wikipedia is and Wikidata are a huge source of entities in the knowledge graph, but it's not a one-to-one. It doesn't mean that if it can't link to a Wikipedia article, Google doesn't know what it is. So like over here, rapper, person, there's no Wikipedia article on the concept of being a rapper. That doesn't mean Google doesn't understand who rappers are. Then you see next to it, Mike King, organization. Mike King is a person. That might be, and certainly in the context of this sentence, Mike King, best rapper ever, is a person. That might be an area where you might want to disambiguate via context. But just because there's no Wikipedia article doesn't mean that Google can't understand what words mean.
Yep. So, and then Google is doing very similar things now with their Vision API. As they're processing images, they're trying to figure out what is in the image. And they have this database of images that they can compare your images to say, number one, do we already have this image? Is it stock photography or is it something unique? Because again, they're pushing harder on you to have unique images. So that's one thing. But then when you have a unique image, they can go, oh, it's a unique image. We've never seen this one before. We haven't seen this exact one. We've seen close, but let's see what's it close to. And they actually will take an image and you can upload it. I included a link to play with it. And it'll give you the score of how related it is to these different entity concepts. So you can see there are 5 entities here. And obviously they're related, right? Because we have Volkswagen Beetle, Volkswagen as a brand, Volkswagen Type 2, which is a kind of Beetle, it's a subset. And then we have behind it, the Volkswagen Van, this broader definition of car, right? Car and van are big, and then we narrow it down into the different entities and kind of subclassifications of the entities. And so you want to make sure that you have meaningful images on your site that are adding to the context and the entity recognition rather than taking it away. Like if you're the Angels baseball team and your site talks about the Angels and then actually has pictures of angels instead of baseball, things are going to go wrong. And so you've got to get the images right and make sure they're clear, they're not too esoteric or vague, and you want to be direct with your images there. And then the other thing you can do as a tactical thing is understand that there may be not just holes in your entity map or your relationship to other entities, but there may be just holes in the larger Google understanding of entities. And you may be the filling of that hole, right? If Google doesn't understand your brand, then it's time to start feeding Google information in all of the places it looks to build out your entity. And entities exist in a context. And so you need to make sure Google has that context everywhere that it's looking. So if there are industry lists, your brand needs to be on the industry lists and associated with the industry. And if you have competitors and they're doing like comparisons of like our stuff is better than all of our competitors, you want to be there in that competitive list. If you have products, they need with special names that are not just like shoes or basketball shoes, those names need to be associated with your brand. The founder, has to have the origin story of the brand and why she created it, and what's special about it. And those things all come together to build out your part, your niche within the larger entity graph. So it's kind of like industry, and here is like car was in the Volkswagen example. That's a larger thing, and you want to make sure that you are within that thing classified correctly. And so another way to just poke around if you're not sure how Google is understanding entities and your relationship with different things. You can just see there's a lot of disambiguation and kind of filtering that happens in Google Images that I think is fascinating and often weirdly wrong. But it's like Google testing things, right? And so even my name, you can see that I'm associated with lots of correct things like digital marketing and Google and phones and Fraggles. And stuff, but then there's been some weird stuff too, where I was associated with someone else's company in addition to my company. And so I was like, oh, I wonder, why are they thinking I've never even written for that company? Why do they think I'm from that company or I have any association with that company? And it turned out there was a really well-ranking podcast that I was on from that company. And so for a couple weeks, Google thought maybe I worked there. And so that's where you get the hints where it's like, okay, they've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. They know I Google and I optimize and marketing consultancy. But then, you see weird things like, where it says LinkedIn. To me, that makes me think people are searching for Cindy Krum LinkedIn. That's pretty great, except that girl's not me. And so I know it's little, but that's not me. And but Google thinks we look enough alike, me and a couple other people, and we talk about similar stuff that is like, whatever, close enough. And so that's where you need to do some better disambiguation, get some better pictures, or whatever, to help Google understand what's going on.
Cool.
Mike, this one I think was from Aaron, but I can go through it as well if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So the other thing to think about if you're a company trying to build out your entity understanding is to just make sure that you're giving Google all the information that you possibly can, because there are channels where you can just feed Google information about your brand and your entity, like official channels. It's not hacky. And the biggest one is Google Business Profiles. Make sure that you're listed clearly in Google Business Profiles, and that you have accurate information, phone numbers, pictures, all of that stuff. There are differences between what people in the local SEO community might consider a ranking factor in local SEO and what can help your brand as a whole in entity recognition. So for instance, like your description of your company in the Google Business Profile doesn't technically help with local SEO per se, but it does help with Google understanding who you are, and you get to feed that to them directly. Same with pictures and the products. You can now integrate Merchant Center with your Google Business Profile, and that's a pretty strong signal to Google that you sell stuff. And if you have addresses, that you sell stuff offline. And so make sure you're taking advantage of stuff like that. And there are other ways to do it too. Google has categories within Google Play and other places where you can just put stuff in. Put your books in, make sure that all of that is there. Make sure you have an author page. If you've written a book and it's on Amazon, they have author pages. If you're a founder or you have a founder, make sure that they're in all of the right founder directories. Make sure you're feeding the places that Google natively ingests or that Google crawls frequently looking for updates and new information.
Yeah, one thing I want to highlight about Merchant Center right now, they are actually pulling shipping costs from Merchant Center and then showing them in the SERP, like without you having that in your structured data. And so it's definitely something to watch out for, because what people tend to put in their merchant feed is like the worst case shipping prices. And so as a result, people might not click on your thing because it's like, oh, shipping is $500 or something crazy that it wouldn't actually be. So it's not necessarily a bug, but it's something that people need to look out for if they're going to provide that data to Merchant Center. So
there too, Mike, about why Google is pushing hard on Merchant Center. And I think the reality is that so many companies had ongoing struggles with getting their product schema right and keeping it fresh and updated and structured and easy to crawl. And Google had so much overhead with crawling really JavaScript heavy product pages and rendering them that Google's like, oh my God, just give it to us for God's sake. And so that's where all the fields in Merchant Center are basically like a breakout of schema. With plus, like plus more.
So, Ruth, you want to tell us how we identify, build, and strengthen our entities?
Yes, I do. And thank you both so much for setting up so many points that I want to make in this section so beautifully so that I can refer back to them. So if you've worked in SEO for any amount of time, you have heard that the secret to SEO is just create good content. What does that mean? What is good content? How do you know that it's good? That has really bothered me for like 10 years now. Anyway, one of the things that I'm really excited about with entity relationships in search is that it gives you more indicators about whether or not your content is good, which is to say whether or not it is a useful, robust, in-depth resource on a given topic. So the example that I'm using here is a store called Surf Station Store. They're not a client of mine. I just felt like thinking about the beach today and I like their stuff. In general, you probably know the main entities that you are trying to establish because either they're your brand name, they're your founder, they're the people who are, the high profile people who are creating content for you, or they're the main topics that you are trying to tell Google et al. That your site and your content is about. So for Surf Station Store, that's things like surfing, surfboards, skating, skateboards, skates. Retail store, that's a little bit broad, but we do want them to understand that this is a retail store, and then clothing. And so then within all of those categories, you've then got different kinds of surfboards, different brands of surfboards, the relationships between them, the relationships between things like surfing and skating with the same brand that is due to two different product lines, etc. A lot of that you probably know at a high level. And this is an area where I do think it is useful to conflate entity and topic a little bit, because at this point we are humans creating content for humans. And that is as much, if not more, about topics than entities, but it can be both. It's both. So, I mean, at a top level, that's what you're doing. From there, you can get a sense of how Google and the places that Google looks for information are looking at your entities. So that could be things like the NLP API. Wikipedia is a great source to understand sort of the larger topic graph that Google and other search engines look at. You can look at the knowledge graph. You can use the knowledge graph API, which is something that I do a lot. Just kind of pull in and look at what is the information that Google, I'm just saying Google, it's Google and other search engines, but really we're talking about Google, is looking at when it comes to these entities. What are the related topics that you can very easily see? Going back to Cindy's point about making a topic map and making an entity map, where are those relationships very clear? And then how can we put those together to create something that is worthwhile and useful? So the example that I often come back to is robots.txt. There's no Wikipedia page for robots.txt. If you look in Wikipedia, the page on that is called the robots exclusion standard. Now, old school keyword-based SEO might then lead you to think, oh, if I'm going to create a page, it should be called robots exclusion standard, not robots.txt. We're way past that at this point. Google understands that these are the same things. You can tell because if you search robots.txt in Wikipedia, it redirects to robots exclusion standard. These things are the same. We understand that they're the same. So try to get out of the habit of thinking about exact match keywords. We're well past that. You can use tools like Ngrams to sort of look at the stems and variants of your targeted topics. But really, if you're speaking naturally about a topic, you will often fold in the different variants of those. So I'm less concerned about that right now than identifying the related entities. Some related entities are going to be really easy. Some connections might be a little less intuitive, but there is enough of a connection between these on the web that Google can understand that they are related. So there are a few different places to look for this. Wikipedia has a huge list of see also and related topics at the end of every page. The more broad your topic is, the more information is going to be in there. That's fairly easy to scrape. Google Trends related topics, I think, is an underutilized source of these entity relationships, especially when you're looking at things that might be sort of emerging and might not have a ton of traffic or otherwise established relationships. Google Trends is often floating stuff out there to kind of see, like, is this related? I think it is. It's not. Google is more likely, in my experience, to suggest related topics that they're less confident about in trends than in some other places. And then, there's good old fashioned don't hit enter. At this point, autocomplete, auto-suggest in Google really is just suggesting closely related entities to whatever your STEM term is. So there are a lot of places that you can identify really closely and sometimes more tangentially related entities as you're gathering these things up. You can also, so going back to Cindy's point, I think just looking at the SERP for that topic, like what do the top ranking pages on this topic talk about? If you want to know what's an example of a good page on this topic, you can see what Google already thinks are good pages on this topic. What are they talking about? What related entities are they pulling in? Where are they linking to, etc. You can also look at the knowledge panel. People also ask. So also asked is a great tool to easily get people also ask data at scale. And you can look in e-commerce data, going back to Cindy's point about Google Images. The same thing you can often see in e-commerce data in terms of drilling down beyond the initial search into related topics. These are all sort of more manual, but I think really valuable ways that you can identify related entities to your related entity, to your initial entity. And as you do this, you're going to start finding commonalities. You're going to start finding similar themes, the same way that you might do in a good old-fashioned keyword research project, but less focused on the initial on the exact wording and more focused on the underlying topics and their relationships to each other. I still really like what we used to call a hub and spoke model, and what I've been thinking lately is more of a pillar-based model. If you are building something that is the ultimate guide to surfing, so like here they've got how to choose a surfboard, it is possible to pull in, okay, what are the related topics that the ultimate guide to X thing should talk about? And the thing is, you are never going to be able to create something that is actually the ultimate guide to something that is going to discuss every single related topic in detail, which is fine because people don't actually want that. If you are reading the ultimate guide to whatever thing, you actually are looking for a fairly broad and high level overview. Otherwise, you would know the more specific topic that you want to drill down into. So for an entity-based content strategy, what you're looking at is where are the related entities that I'm going to include on page? Where are the subchapters, subheadings? And it can be very easy to just ask a question and then answer it in each subheading. How do I know what size of surfboard? Well, choosing a size of surfboard, blah, 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 blah. From there, you can link out to more specific surfboard sizing guides. So getting from your core pillars into sub pillars, where you're creating more detailed guides into more detailed topics. There's another page about that. So this is an example from Content King about meta tags. I got meta tags and SEO, the ultimate guide. Got a table of content. So this is another thing that I think can be really valuable just to emphasize those entity relationships, is to create a table of content with HTML anchors. So you're linking down to each related sub entity. That's also, it helps. I mean, Google's getting better at this anyway, but this idea of extracting a piece of content from the page and then linking from the SERP directly to that entity on that page. Why not make it nice and easy, nice and extractable, nice and reproducible in the SERP by linking directly to it with an HTML anchor. And then you've also got that anchor text to kind of reinforce the relationships between the page as a whole and those individual topics. Creating drill downs. And then from there, you can get super, super specific. And what you can create here is sort of choose your own adventure for your users and for search engines, where it doesn't matter if they drill down. I mean, it does and it doesn't. For our purposes, it doesn't. It doesn't matter what they click on next, as long as they're staying on the page, because as long as they're continuing to click, means their information gathering journey isn't over. The consideration part of the journey, which is around 80% of the customer journey, depending on what they're doing, can go in any order. They can consume any piece of content in any order they like. Your job is to present that content in a way that makes it easy to go deeper or shallower, to view related topics, and to continue finding the information while putting our marketing hats on, also providing ample opportunities to convert, of course. So, the examples here, so these are some of the sub pillars that SurfStation Store has. And if we go on to Content King, we've got some examples there too, going from meta tags to then into like meta robots tag. They've got a whole guide just on the meta robots tag. This is what made me think of this earlier. And then drilling way down even deeper into things like HTML redirects into canonical URLs, things that can get super specific. So if somebody's searching canonical URLs, then they want a piece that goes real deep just into that. You've got that. And if somebody's reading along, they're like, canonical URLs, I don't know what that is. They can just click into it. If all of this sounds like fairly classic SEO content strategy, it's because it is. But what we can start doing is using entity relationships and using the position of different entities within that entity graph, regardless of language, regardless of format, to understand the relationships between these and build them out in intuitive ways. And while Google is never going to function like a human brain, because there's no reason for it to function like a human brain, Google is interested in how humans consume content, because ultimately that's who looks at ads and buys things, which is what Google cares about, because that's how they make money and preserve their market share. So creating these relationships makes it really easy to see that you have a lot of in-depth information and that all of it is closely related. So what this means in a lot of cases is, and this is something that I think people have been saying for a few years now, it is harder for a non-expert to create this kind of content, simply because the amount of information required to be useful is difficult to create at a shallow level. And that's part of what things like the helpful content update were designed to combat, is this sort of high level overview without the underpinnings of that deeper, more specific information. That is something that is increasingly easy for Google to understand, and it's something that they're using their own entity graph and maps of entity relationships to do. So when it comes to entity usage, there are a few different ways that you can do this. You can go top down, you can go bottom up. So one thing you can do, you can take a look at what are the organic keywords that you are currently ranking for. For me, what I like to look at is what are the things that we are ranking on page 2 through 5 for. Where are the places where Google is detecting a topical significance for this page, but is not finding it sufficiently salient to the target entity to rank it? And you can do the same. You can look at your competitors. And this is also a great way, going back to that idea of entities and topics. Where are the target entities that your competitors have a lot of content around that you don't? Where can you create new content around that and then build those relationships via internal links with your existing content to show a more in-depth understanding in this area? So that's one way to do it. Yeah. And then the other way is looking at where you are currently ranking weekly and saying, okay, to Cindy's point earlier, changing that one sentence to make it clear that this was not a work of art, it was an organization, was enough to, sometimes it can be that simple, especially if you are on page 2. So I do think in terms of improving your entity usage, the first place I would always look is the pages that are ranking on page 2. Like that's your low hanging fruit. And then from there, and sometimes the answer is not easy. Sometimes it's not as easy as rewriting the page. Sometimes it's like, I need to add a lot of additional information and some additional pages around this in order to really create a robust resource. But it is the first place to look, because it means that Google at least understands what you're going for, what the target entity is. You're just not quite there.
Ruth, let me just tell you on this one, I have seen entity recognition change based on capitalization, based on putting single or double quotes around things, based on hyphenating things, or based on changing some other piece of punctuation like a period to a question mark or a semicolon. It's wild that you can change entity recognition with capitalization, but you definitely can. So play with those things too.
Links just had a big study about that kind of blew my mind about how big of a difference capitalization can make. Yeah. I'm like a little afraid to talk about it because I don't want everybody to go to do it because it's going to make the web look very strange and hard to read, but it currently works.
Yeah, it'll get us back to when we were like bolding and italicizing everything.
That was my first SEO job, was to go through a business's blog every week and bold and unbold things. And
blink tag.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And like the extent of our link building was whatever keyword you were trying to rank for, you put that in Google and then you add URL and then you just drop links all over the place. Oh, 2006. It was a great time.
Wild, Wild West. So Cindy already talked about this a bit, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but using the NLP API can be a great way to just figure out whether or not Google's picking up what you're putting down. So what we can see here in this example is that there is a lot of other. There are a lot of things where like Google's API understands that this is an entity just based on context from the text itself, but it's not connecting it to the larger concept. I mean, some of these probably are other, but a lot of them aren't. We can also see that there are some non-salient entities that are getting high salience scores. So one example here, this is an article on picking sunscreen. And one of the top most salient entities that they find is the word influx, which they can identify as an event. Influx is not a closely related entity to sunscreen. So what that means is that in addition to making it clear what our entities are, we also need to disambiguate this content and make it clear what our entities aren't, which can also be fascinating and useful. So one of the things, so Mike talked about this a little bit. One of the things that I would really encourage everybody to start doing is to not bury the lead and to reduce the semantic distance between entities. And I'll talk more about that second part in a bit. So the classic example of annoying web content today is recipe content, right? You search for a recipe, you click through, it's 1,000 pages about grandma's farm back when you were a little girl, and then here's the recipe for grandma's apple cake. And people complain about this. There is a completely legitimate reason that recipe blogs do this, and it is because that many recipe sites are blogs as much or more so than they are recipe search sites. So they're treating their site like a blog. They're trying to engage and keep engaged existing readership who actually do care about all that stuff. That's great. I want to bake an apple cake. I don't know you. I don't care about your grandma. Sorry. I'm sure she's lovely. But this goes back to a very old pre-internet journalistic concept of not burying the lead. One of the things that I think that you can do to really easily strengthen your entity targeting within content and make your content less annoying is to serve quick search intent upfront. So this idea that one piece of content can only serve one searcher's intent or the search intent for one kind of query is a dinosaur. With longer content, especially with Google's ability to extract and reproduce chunks of that content, you can create something that serves both a quick answer and an in-depth answer. And the best way to do that is to serve that quick intent up front. It's a better user experience. It also makes it much clearer to Google and other search engines what your page is actually about. And then for people who do want that more in-depth information, people who do want to read the story about grandma, that's still there on the page. You've just served the quick intent up front. So those people get what they want, satisfied customer, continue on about their day. That's not a bad thing. You don't need to keep these people on your website if they don't want to be there. That's nothing. You're not helping anybody, and you're not making your website better. But for the people who do want to be there and do want to read, it's still there. So I think that's a really easy, simple thing is just, and this is a great example. Here's how to pick sunglasses that fit your face. The second paragraph is just a couple lines from an optometrist about generally how should sunglasses fit. Great, cool. If that's all I want, I'm gone. If I'm like, no, really, how do I pick sunglasses that fit my face? Last year, I looked like an alien. Then you've got this whole other piece that will go into more in depth. It's both. It can be both. So be less annoying and get to the point. You can also disambiguate. So, I mean, the classic example is cookies, right? Like, do you want chocolate chip cookies or do you want...
Yes, all the time.
Yeah, same. I always want chocolate chip cookies. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. I could go for a cookie. Or do you want little packets of web data that your browser gets served? This is an example of this point in Google. It's very easy for Google to tell which one that you mean, but how you can do that is by surrounding your entities semantically in the text with related entities. So not just thinking about establishing entity relationships as links out to other pages about other entities, but going back to Mike's point earlier about semantic triples, strengthening via language how you are showing the relationships between concepts within your copy. And what that often comes down to is reducing the semantic distance between entities or saying the same thing with fewer words, or saying the same thing with more specific words. So being clear, consistent, concise, readable. What's great about this is that it's also better writing, and people like to read it. And it is a way anywhere you can go through and be like, is this vague? Watch pronouns. Many people do not use pronouns well. If you're saying it, if you're saying them, to what are you referring? If it's not clear, this is a great time to not use a pronoun, y'all. Just say the word again. It'll be fine. So really taking a look at whether or not you're saying what you think that you're saying. And this is an area where a lot of times people are saying, okay, just get experts to create expert content. Yes, good, do that. They have the information. Are they good writers? Maybe not. Are they articulate? Maybe not. Are they good at staying on topic while they write something? Maybe not. These are the areas where you as a marketer can still bring your marketing knowledge, especially as you're learning more about entities and building entities relationships within content, to help your experts create content that is not only deep in topic, but also highly machine readable and parsable.
I just want to say that the replace the ambiguous pronoun with the word is the best piece of SEO advice and writing advice that I think I've heard all year. I give similar advice all the time. And then Mike, I know you wanted to say something too. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say we're at the hour. Are y'all good to go a couple more minutes so we can get through this? Okay, anyone that's watching, if you've got to go, don't worry. We're going to send out the recap. We'd love for you to, continue to hang out with us, but we're going to get through this and then shoot it out with the resources and so on. And Ruth, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, I'm glad. I always love when people point out that we're at meeting time and ask if people are good to continue. Some people don't do that, and it's rude. So we talked about linking to subsections with HTML anchors already, because I got excited and talked about that early. So we could go to the next slide. Using semantic markup. Obviously, like, semantic markup is a great way to tell search engines exactly what your code is about. We've included this example on semantic markup and web design, which is from a Seek Brevity blog post. One thing that I'm seeing a lot that is really grinding my gears lately is that there are a lot of websites that are not coded according to HTML best practices. We won't apply a value judgment as to why that's happened, but it has happened. And if everything's in a div tag, if you're not using IDs consistently, if you're only using CSS for styling and not for information hierarchy, these are things that it's going to make it harder for you to accurately and specifically mark up your content. So there are things that you can do on the back end within your theme, within your code, to make it easier for yourself across your entire website to mark up your site. So do that. Get a dev who is in the modern world and understands best practices. I was going to say not lazy, but good. Just hire a competent person to do a good job. Would the tutorial so simple? Anyway, once you've got your website properly set up, which I recommend doing for your own peace of mind, you can then use markup to mark things up. And there are a couple of specifically topic related pieces of markup that I don't see people using a lot. One is about, one is mentions. Even main content of page, people don't necessarily use as much as they should. You can also mark up your links, the links that you are trying to use to establish relationships, with things like significant link, related link, so that it's very easy to see, like, here's what it's about. Mentions can also be really useful for disambiguation. If your post is on Instagram techniques for the holidays, like your post is more about Instagram than it is about the holidays, using about and mention to disambiguate in that way can be helpful when you are trying to send a clear signal about what your post is and is not about. So mark up judiciously. Don't mark up things that aren't there or lie in your markup, because that's a waste of your time and you're embarrassing yourself. But mark up thoughtfully and consistently. And that's the whole point of markup, is to help search engines better understand what a piece of information is and where it appears on your page. So why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, 2 quick points here. One, the semantic markup, if you do what you just described, where someone is like putting, using IDs inconsistently and putting everything in a div, and it's not very clear what the order is. That's also really bad for accessibility as well, because your screen reader like reads things out of order and what have you. And then the thing about schema and things, I think we're at a point where we need to stop thinking about, oh, do I just mark this up because it gives me something in the SERP? Like, I think you should be marking up anything. Like, I don't think it's just about like, oh, how do we get visibility in the events thing, or how do we get in the knowledge graph? I think it's just better for us to mark up everything that's relevant on the page, so that there's more opportunities for it to be extracted in the way that we want, and then used in the knowledge graph in the way that we want.
Yeah, and that ability to extract and reproduce things in the SERP in terms of things like rich results and featured snippets is certainly something that Google, I think, has used to encourage people like us to implement markup. But really, markup is also used so much on the back end in things that don't drive rich results, just to enhance understanding. And anytime you're trying to enhance Google's understanding, which is what entity optimization is all about, anytime you're trying to enhance that understanding, reinforce what's on the page with existing data, that's when markup can be really useful, even if you never get a rich result from it.
Absolutely.
Be clear, consistent, and readable. I touched on this earlier. I really recommend using a readability tool. Yoast has a built-in readability function. You can also use Hemingway. You can use Grammarly. There are a lot of places that will give you a readability score. You're not always trying to get your readability score as low as possible. So if you have a client that is speaking to like a highly technical audience on a highly technical topic, you don't necessarily need to get that down to like a grade 4 reading level. But you do want to make sure that you are writing in consistent, readable ways. And the more technical a topic you're writing on, the harder that is to do. Going back to this idea of experts not always being great writers, it's very easy to get so far into the jargon that's like, okay, what is this page about? You see with B2B websites a lot. B2B companies get really in their own heads about how they talk about their own products. Then you read the product page and you're like, okay, but what does it do? What does the product do? Which is an important part, I would say, of any product page. So using a readability score, you can't proofread your own work. You can't look at your own work and be like, oh yeah, that's readable, because of course you can read it. You wrote it. You know what you were talking about. Using a tool to consistently optimize for readability, making sure that you're clear. Also, grammar and spelling. This has nothing to do with entity extraction. It's just that it's a really easy machine readable quality signal that should be table stakes at this point. Just use a tool to make sure that your content is good. And then linking internally and externally. So if SurfStation Store was a client of mine, I would say, oh, you've got some great internal link opportunities here. So this is a page on choosing surfboard fins, and it's just got a paragraph each on the different kinds of fins. And that's an appropriate amount of content for this guide. And if somebody's like, what are glassed-on fins? I want to learn all about that. Having a page all about glassed-on fins, not only is that a closely related entity to the idea of surfboard fins overall, it's also something that if users are making this purchasing decision, they might want to know more about. So linking out to related entities to help people to drill down. And then also thinking about external linking. So happy that we as an industry are getting over our allergy to linking externally. It's okay to link externally. So the example that I have here is from SurfStation Store's guide on choosing the best sunscreen. Is anyone at SurfStation Store a doctor? No. Are they a dermatologist? Probably not. So do they need to have a page on UVA rays or on UVB rays? Like, is that probably going to rank for those terms? Probably not. If somebody is searching for that information, do they want a surfboard? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that their users don't want to learn more about it. So linking externally to expert content that's outside your area of expertise, but is still semantically and topically related to those entities, is a great way to reinforce that this is a good page about this thing, because it allows you to find all of the information about that thing agnostically of what page it's on. And then connecting questions and answers. So again, going back to that idea of reducing the semantic distance between entities. What is a good credit score? A good credit score is blah, blah, blah. And, as SEOs, the answer is often, it depends. So going back to the cookies example, what is the best temperature at which to bake cookies? It depends on your altitude and what kind of cookie and how you want to cook them. That's a terrible answer. That tells you nothing. It's true and it's terrible. What you can instead say is, anywhere from 325 to 425, depending on the factors that I just said. It's the same answer. It's the same answer, but it's an actual answer to the question. So connect questions and answers. Don't bury the lead. Don't be annoying. Don't ask a question and take 500 words to answer it. Ask and answer. Connect those two things. It's better for search. It's better for users. And then if you want to say 500 more words, some people will read that, and that's cool too. But don't make them read it. Especially don't make Google read it, because Google's going to forget the question by the time it gets to the answer. And then have a point of view. So if you are not saying anything that the top ranking pages on this entity already say, on this topic already say, why should you rank instead of them? There might be answers, but one thing to do is look at how you are including unique information. So I actually think Content King app does a great example of this in their content by having this little meta tags in short, this little just TLDR at the beginning of every page. It's super useful. It's something that not everyone else targeting this topic is doing. You don't, if it's a highly factual page, you might not be able to invent new facts, but saying something, having a point of view, having a perspective, and bringing in new ideas to a topic is another way. Going back to this idea of using a new image as opposed to an image that's everywhere on the web. If it's something new, that's something that then Google can consider, and it might work, it might not, but I think it's another way that you can differentiate and show why should this page rank instead of this other page. So we've included a little checklist here of all of the things that I was just talking about, which someone, I think Erin, has made into a beautiful PDF. It was not me. Graphic design is not my passion, but that will be available after the webinar.
I want to
shout out to Erin.
Before we go to the next section, I just want to jump in because something that didn't make it into this presentation, because it's a whole nother kind of ball of wax, but is deeply related and important. If you've read anything about MUM, Google MUM, which is their multi-touch unified attribution model or unified model, but it basically is like Google's future-y way of taking a deeper understanding of search and allowing you to do search that's multimodal. This will really, like reading about this and testing their multi-search or reading about their multi-search feature will really help give you a deeper understanding of how and why entities are deeply important. Because in some cases, especially with the multi-search examples that they give you, the keyword is gone. And so we have someone submitting a picture of a bicycle part and saying how to fix, or someone submitting a picture of a dress and saying this in green. And so they're relying on two different kinds of input. It's not multi-touch, it's multi-input or something like that, multi-something.
Multimodal.
Thank you, multimodal. That makes sense. So it's like image plus a query or video plus a query or whatever plus, and they take those two things to make the query. But when you search for how to fix, Google only uses the image entity understanding as the to feed that concept. And so that's the future-y part of all of this and where Google wants to be.
Just one thing to add to that, it is, of course, absolutely the future, but it's also what you have now, where it's like if you walk up to a monument and you're like, hey, Google, what thing am I standing in front of? Like they're able to implicitly understand based on your location and so on and so forth. I don't have to tell you, Cindy, you've been talking about that forever. I just wanted to highlight that for the folks at home. And of course, my phone made some noise when I was saying all that. All right, so how do we best, measure entity SEO performance? Just to close this out to some degree. So at the end of the day, it's all about, did what we do actually improve our rankings? Like there's no other real measure. Of course, you can look at salient scores and things like that as like an intermediate thing, but really at the end of the day, we're looking to improve our rankings. So the question then becomes, do entity SEO tools just fall short? Yes and no. So the reason why I say yes and no is a lot of tools that we have for like content optimization specifically say that they're doing entity related stuff, but there's no evidence of that. So if they are under the hood and I just don't know and I'm wrong, all good. Send me an email, mike@iPullRank.com. I'll recant my statement. But based on what we can see in a lot of these tools, it does not look like they're leveraging entities. And so just some quick examples. I believe this tool is phrase. So when you go through on the right side, it'll tell you like, hey, you need to be talking more about these topics. And so topics are not inherently entities. They may be entities, but there's no indication as to whether or not they are actually using entities when they're giving you this feedback. Or if you look at a tool like Content Success by Write, great tool. Phrase is also a great tool. And, both of these tools may actually get you there, even if they aren't explicitly looking for entities, because like Ruth was saying, there is a lot of overlap between a topic and an entity. But one thing that I think is kind of a miss by how tools like this work, they're looking vertically at a SERP. They're not looking horizontally across the entities in their relationship. So in this example, it's basically looking up the keyword business intelligent reporting and then looking for pages that rank for that keyword and then going straight down and saying, okay, what are the co-occurring terms on these pages? So not inherently entities, but again, you could potentially be getting there because there is that overlap. And then a tool like Search Metrics' Content Experience, they are doing a better job of looking, horizontally, or not just horizontally, across the graph at the topic, in that they're looking for, in this case, I put in the keyword vinyl records, and they're like, okay, here are other related terms that you should be working in to build this topical cluster. But again, not the same as entities. So, there are a variety of tools out there to unearth information about the semantic web. This tool is called Entity, and it gives you a tree of entities based on the entity that you've put in here. So this is pulling from the Wikidata data, and it's showing you, okay, I put in the keyword, or I put in the entity rather, vinyl record, and now it's showing me the other entities that are subclasses of vinyl record. And then vinyl record is a subclass of phonograph record. So what I can then do is look at these in more detail. So it's going to give me the paragraph, but if you click on the Wikidata link as well, you can then look in there and see what are some of the other attributes of this entity and or entities that are related to it. So you're going to want to look across all of these and then think about, how can I write about this in my content? Now, one thing to just highlight, and Google can't make a determination of what to do with an entity if it doesn't know about it. So, this is one data set to be looking at. And of course, they are using what's in Wikidata, but you do want to make sure that whatever entity you want to optimize for is in Google's data set, which you can get by using the NLP API. But there are two great tools in the SEO space that are doing this, very well, and that they are surfacing the entity information and giving you that feedback in your content. And that's InLinks and WordLift. So InLinks, one of the things that it does, again, as you're optimizing your content, it'll tell you on the right side, like, hey, here are different, it's calling them topics, but these are actually entities. And when you click into them, you can find out more information on these entities. And again, these entities align directly with what you can find in other data sources. Another thing that it does is it generates an entity map across your website by crawling your website, and it can also automatically generate internal links between pages where those entities are related. And it also can help you generate your schema as well. And so WordLift,
they also have a readability tool as well. So that's built, that same functionality is also built in.
Yep, absolutely. And WordLift also, does the same thing, but they also have a WordPress plugin, so you can be doing this stuff directly within your website. And so as you can see here, this page is about me being the best rapper ever, because it's only true. It's telling me, here are other entities that are considered the best rapper ever that you might want to talk about. So, there's a lot of people that make the argument for Jay-Z and Lil Wayne and Rakim. I don't know anyone that makes the argument for Insane Clown Posse, but apparently the web thinks so. So we got to also talk about why that's not true. And so it builds a knowledge graph for you. And again, it's representing it in a very similar way to what you're seeing in other data sets as they relate to, Wikidata and so on. And also WordLift themselves, they have their own knowledge graph, which you can reference and click into and see information about those different entities. And so leveraging that structured data, it's allowing you to connect to those existing entities. So again, mentioning Rakim here, who by and large, if you were a rap listener in the 80s, everyone agreed was the best rapper ever, then you can dig into that, find out more information about him, and then write about him on that page. And another thing that it does is it adds that structured data like seamlessly via that WordPress plugin. So we've got this video on the page that it will quickly just, add all the information that we need right there. And then we don't have to think about, manually implementing the schema to reinforce this entity. And it adds it to your articles. They've really built this out in a way where a lot of this isn't stuff that you have to think about so much. It's just baked into your website through their plugins. And then they also give you, they have a connector to Looker Data Studio now, where you can analyze those topical clusters, the entity performance, and then, see where your gaps are as well. So one more thing that I actually put together, if you don't have a budget for tools, all those tools have free trials. I would recommend you check them out. But if you run out of your free trial or whatever, they're using another set of open source tools, specifically a tool called Spacey. You can actually do the named entity recognition yourself using this code. So I basically put together a quick little collab notebook where you can put in copy, you can put in a URL, you can upload a file, and then it'll generate the same sort of thing that you get from the Google NLP API, and it'll show you the entities that are being used within your copy right there.
I'm definitely going to check out this tool, and just want to second the plug for Spacey. If you are inclined to homebrew your own entity recognition or natural language processing focused tools for your own content, I think learning Spacey, it's pretty simple for what
really
it is
easy
and really useful. So check it out. If you want to learn something, this is the next thing I recommend you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just grab this collab notebook, I mean, I've done most of it for you. I've got a lot of comments in there showing you what's happening. So, you can definitely build on top of it. Spacey has a variety of different things in it. And then also you might want to check out Hugging Face, which is like, a great organization that's all about like natural language processing and natural language understanding and natural language generation. So, if I didn't have my own company, like that's probably where I would work right now, because they're just at the cutting edge of all that sort of stuff. Well, I'm being presumptive. I would try to work there. Like, who knows if they would hire me. So, Cindy, anything that you wanted to highlight about MobileMoxie?
Just that, we're here. We help with mobile SEO and app SEO, and we have really cool tools. One of the tools that we have, which is our paid tool, a paid version of the Pagescope, can be pretty handy for watching some of these things in your code, because what it does is it grabs the rendered and unrendered code and archives it on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And it's phone specific and country specific. So if you're doing international stuff and changing things by device or changing things by country, like prices or currencies or whatever, we can capture that and capture rendered and unrendered code. And we have a diff checker that does rendered versus unrendered, or you can compare dates of this rendered versus 2 weeks ago rendered, or this unrendered versus 2 weeks ago, or compare devices. We give you lots of options, and it's useful for troubleshooting when like your rankings drop off. It could be related to entity recognition. It could be related to someone accidentally deleting your schema, stuff like that. We can capture that and find out who to blame.
Cool. So, parting thoughts. What should people do as soon as they get off of this webinar? Start with you, Ruth. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was coughing. I mean, I think the first thing that they should do is have a plan for analytics getting next year, which is what I talked about before we started. But the first thing related to what we just talked about that they should do is, I mean, I think that in terms of like the best bang for your buck that you could do today, take a look at the content that you have that's ranking on page 2 and run it through the natural language processing API and just see where you can make minor tweaks to improve entity salience. There are probably things that are wider scale that you could do that would have more of an impact over time. But in terms of like something that you could do today to get more traffic very quickly, that's what I would do.
What are your thoughts, Cindy?
Yeah, or start with a tool like InLinks or Write and start really evaluating and getting some benchmarks of where you're at now and where your competitors are at, so you know what to prioritize.
I agree with all of that. WordLift, InLinks, definitely. Analytics Get and so on. I also would recommend that people just mess around with Wikidata, like put in some of your queries and see what they come back with, and just start getting more familiar with those relationships so you can start thinking about them when you're doing keyword research, when you're starting to write and things of that nature. Cool. So we don't really have time for questions, but you guys can all email us, hit us on the socials and all that. Just real quick to roll the credits. Anything you want to say about UpBuild, Ruth?
UpBuild, we're advanced technical marketers. We're an agency built by people who hated working at agencies. So a lot of agencies can run your site through a tool and give you a list of things to fix. We really pride ourselves on taking the time to work with you to figure out how to fix them and who's going to do them, and then bothering you until you fix them. Same with analytics. If you are intimidated by Google Analytics 4 and if you just want to talk to somebody about Google Analytics 4, hit me up. But if you want somebody to just do it for you, we can also do
that. Cindy?
Yeah, you guys already heard about our paid tools. We also have the free Chrome extensions, and they're free. Yeah, that's a picture of them. And so check those out. And we also offer technical SEO and ASO consulting. And I love this stuff, man. We eat and drink and breathe it all day. So yeah, great to talk to you guys.
Cool. And we've also got a new ebook rolling out, the SEO playbook for the recession, because allegedly we're in one. But definitely want to make sure that y'all are ready and you can capitalize in this moment. Garrett does the SEO Weekly, which is can't miss television or internet television. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's one of the best things that you should be watching once a week. And we've also got our Rankable podcast, so check that out. And yeah, that's all we got. Thank you so much for tuning in. Ruth, thank you so much for still doing this despite the fact that you're under the weather.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And Cindy, thank you. I mean, I've said this forever. I still believe this. You're smarter than all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today. And that's all I got. Everybody have a wonderful day, weekend, life, and peace.